Welcome to Trekosophy, the Star Trek Philosophy Podcast. This episode is recorded on August 14th, 2013. Tonight we have our fearless leader, Ben McLean, who's still trying to figure out why anyone would go to Risa instead of just conjuring it up in a holodeck.
They could save money.
And we have our Canadian friend, Brandon Kirby, who turned down two Risian women for a bottle of brandy.
That was
And finally me, Chris McGee, the guy in the red Speedo.
An image that I think none of us needed.
I was just waiting. We discussed it in the pre-show. I was just waiting for you to say it. And then you did.
And tonight we are, if you haven't guessed by the clues, we are discussing Let He Who Is Without Sin. Or more specifically, the New Essentialists. Is that right?
Yeah, New Essentialists. Yeah.
The episode about Risa.
New Essentialists. Fundamentalist Star Trek.
The other episode, everyone's familiar with Captain's Holiday. But this is the one that's a little bit more risque. And a little less deep.
Wait. What do you mean? What do you mean less deep? The New Essentialists thing is, it makes a philosophical issue.
I was just making a joke. I'll probably cut that out. Trying to make a book about how terrible that it's been rated by viewers.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I was going to say
terrible people.
Stoicism
by high people.
Stoicism versus hedonism is, a classic Greek philosophy issue. Goes right back to what centuries would that have been? Brandon, do you know? Would have been after Aristotle. But
you mean to say Stoicism?
Yeah, that's basically
200s BC.
Right, around 200 BC.
That's the essence of this. Our discussion tonight is not about the Jadzia War. It is about that, isn't it?
The romance, or when Jadzia
not the romance
is
between
a man, then it becomes a bromance, doesn't it?
We're totally ignoring the whole Quark and Lita and whatever.
Oh, no, we are not. We are not ignoring that. Not on my watch, mister. Not on my ship, mister.
We can talk about whatever about the episode and about Risa in general.
Okay, fine.
Well, it is tempting to ignore it because of the implications of Jadzia and Worf and the New Essentialists. But the truth is, you've got the New Essentialists who are arguing that our concerns ought to be for higher concerns, not baser or lesser things, i.e., sexuality. We should be concerned with things like the security of the Federation, and we've got to have a proper evaluation. Why are you so passionate about running around in a red Speedo or a gold Speedo with your Trill mate when the Jem'Hadar could be shooting you? I think that's a fair question. I think it's a fair point, and I think it merits discussion, so here we are.
Yeah, and this episode does take place in the 5th season of Deep Space Nine, which is when the Dominion War is heating up.
I might point out what I think is the knockdown objection to the New Essentialists, that even if their point about the Federation being unprepared for war is correct, that has nothing to do with Risa.
But it does. That was their point.
I don't think it has anything to do with Risa, because Risa is one of a gazillion planets they have.
If it was right near the wormhole or something near to Bajor, I could understand. Or maybe if it was really close to Cardassian territory, I could totally understand. But we don't really know exactly where it is. For all we know, it could be really deep in the heart of the Federation, and it's not likely that any Dominion or Cardassians could reach it without getting through Federation's, front lines.
Wait a minute, though. I'm saying this as somebody who's wholly opposed to the ethic and the mentality. But the truth is, the new essentialist argument was never there's a lack of security here on Risa. Their argument was the mentality of the officers who would go to Risa and say, well, I'm going to be hedonistic for a time, a brief time, when in actual fact, they should be more concerned for other things. It wasn't the location of Risa, it was the mentality of the people who were going to Risa. And you have something like Beta Z. As far as I'm concerned, the new essentialists were proven correct. I don't agree with their philosophy, but their predictive power was correct. Beta Z fell in the Dominion War. Beta Z, where you have Loxana Troy and her daughter, brilliant intellectual Deanna Troy, Beta Z couldn't fight the Dominion because there was just no concern for the defense of the planet. They had neglected that.
You're saying that the Federation just neglected Beta Z? There was no one there to defend it? They were all on holiday on Risa?
I'm saying the Beta Zs neglected it. The Beta Zs' own defensive systems were totally inadequate for fighting a war, and they were easily conquered.
That's not necessarily Risa's fault, however.
That's my point.
It's the mentality of the hedonistic Risian slut. Well, I'm trying to make the argument for the new essentialists. In actual fact, I'm a bit of a hedonist myself.
I see you're trying to play devil's advocate.
You absolutely.
Yeah, that's not a valid objection to what's going on in Risa. Because, I mean, it's just a very, very small part of the Federation overall and of these people's lives overall. And because of that. Now, on the other hand, let's imagine there's more context than is shown in the episode. Let's imagine there's a sort of Federation superclass which spends pretty much all their time on Risa. And just owns a whole lot of the economic powers of the Federation. And that it's the laziness of this superclass that the new essentialists are objecting to, that our overall empire is going to cede while our leaders are just carousing around. I guess that might make more sense.
Yeah, that's making some assumptions, though. I'm reading a lot more into the episode.
Yeah, but in regard to the Starfleet officers, it doesn't make very much sense.
And I would bring up the point, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right?
That's the point that Starfleet makes to defend the existence of Risa.
I mean, you're not going to be there, 90% of the year, unless you're part of the super class that you're mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of reminded of the planet from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I think appears in book 2, where the Hitchhiker's Guide offices are located, which is mostly sunny and mostly coastline, and all the land masses are shaped weird to give it as much coastline as possible, and it's just all resort planet.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. It's been a while since I read it.
I just wish I could remember the name of that planet. It was a fun planet. I mean, Ursa Minor Beta? No. Yeah, it was Ursa Minor Beta. That's right. Ursa Minor Beta. And it's basically the Risa of Hitchhikers. But there's no war going on to have anything like the new essentialists in Hitchhikers. But it's the same kind of thing, It's weird how planets in science fiction, so many of them have just one climate, The desert planet, the ice planet, the jungle planet, the resort planet,
The pleasure planet. Yeah. I wanted to make a point, though, where I thought the new essentialists were wrong was it's not necessarily that Risa is a security threat for the Federation, because if it were vital territory, absolutely. Nobody would argue that the military should have stepped in and actually taken control, but it was the mentality, it was the soul of the officer who would go there in the first place. And Ben, I think that's where you and I disagree. I actually I don't think that there was anything disordered about that, whereas the new essentialists were saying, you've gone wrong somewhere to be so concerned with golden Speedos and Dax in a bathing suit so as to come to Risa when you should be more concerned with something else. I think that's what their argument was. It was the soul of the person who would go to Risa or Las Vegas or whatever the relevant location is.
Okay, well, I am not particularly opposed to going on vacation. I enjoy vacations when I can go on them. As an argument against sexual promiscuity, it is an extremely weak argument. I don't see who would even bother to make it. It's so weak. Because, you ought to be doing something else all the time? You know, it just doesn't hold up that you ought to be doing something else all the time. That's not how our lives work. I mean, we go through lots of different things. I mean, life is supposed to have lots of different things in it, not the same thing all the time. And so it's just an incredibly weak argument against sexual promiscuity, and would have no place in any argument I would make against sexual promiscuity, which is, I think, an entirely different issue than the one the essentialists raise.
I took it as meaning that the new essentialists were saying there's a particular valuation, and Starfleet had begun to value the lesser over the greater, which I actually thought was a good argument. But unfortunately, for the purposes of the episode that we're doing on Trekosophy, my judgment here was that it was a good argument because Starfleet was valuing the lesser over the greater, and your view of things is that there's a time and a place for everything. So I think we might actually agree with each other, and that makes for a boring episode because I can only defend the new essentialists in the saying they have a worthwhile thought for so long.
Yeah.
Because I don't actually agree with their thought.
And neither of us is a real stoicist who could take up the new essentialist cause. Now, I do think that the way Risa encourages sleeping around is a problem. Not the fact that you're going to have a resort planet is a problem. I don't think that's a problem. But the fact that it encourages sleeping around, that I see as a problem on grounds that have little or nothing to do with the new essentialist grounds.
Look, I was worried about the fact that we'd have an episode there. We found our episode. We're good to go, after all.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Well, we're talking about how good Chris would look in a red Speedo, and also
incredibly.
As long as you're over a well-sounding microphone, not a.
Hey, ladies, you know you want to see it.
See, now, why can't you announce in that voice? There was just no stuttering or anything. Maybe you should practice that one some more.
I'll get right on that.
Welcome to Trekosophy. Ladies, you want to see it.
Or at least hear
it.
It's
not just a podcast. It's $2.99 a month. It's Chris McGee. All right, Kirby broke Kirby. That's just pathetic. What are we talking about? Pleasure Planet, sex. Ben, I like sex. What's your problem with sex? Go.
Well, I like sex too, but I think
you don't.
What kind of a red-blooded male would I be if I didn't like sex?
Well, you'd be a British person in that case.
I'd be a what?
A British person.
Oh.
Where did that even come from? British people don't like sex. Since when? I've never even heard of that.
Well, there's a particular
It's kind of a
puritanical.
Oh, okay. I'm usually thinking when people say
trope.
Puritans, I'm usually thinking New England. So my bad, not Old England.
Our arms brushed against each other, and that's sex in Britain. But
yeah. Well,
yeah.
the idea
is viewed as very puritanical.
Please edit this out, by the way. Please edit that bit out.
Okay. Well, the idea.
Don't it to be edited out. Let's really confuse the audience here.
Okay. Well, there's two approaches I would make. It's not sex that's a problem, but sexual promiscuity that is a problem. And there are two approaches I could make to why that's a problem, and one of them is from within Christian theology, and the other one is pragmatic. And which one would you rather hear, or in which order?
Both, in any order you prefer.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Christian idea, and to some extent the Jewish and Muslim idea as well, at least the Jewish idea, I'm not sure what Muslims think about sex really, but the Judeo-Christian idea is that God designed human beings to operate in a certain way, which is in marriage. God designed that a man and a woman should come together in marriage and have sex in that context, with the general view in mind of replenishing the earth, which is one of the first commandments God gives in Genesis. And marriage, Jews and Christians believe, was not a man-made convention, but was established by God in the beginning, and has a great deal to do with the purposes for which man was created. And that to take sexuality out of that context and place it into a casual context in which it is pursued solely for the sake of a person's own pleasure, without the accompanying commitment in marriage, degrades it and makes it in the long run a detriment rather than the blessing it was intended to be.
Well, therein lies the alleged, I don't agree on the basis of my Christianity, but therein lies the alleged theological objection. What was the pragmatic objection?
Well, the pragmatic objection goes like this, and it sounds very cynical, especially on the right from the beginning. And there's a couple of things in it that are just real shockers that'll make you want to go, oh, no way. But I think if you think about it a little deeper, it makes a lot of sense. And it basically goes like this. Sexual promiscuity, we're assuming we're talking about heterosexuality here. We aren't even bringing homosexuality into it. We're talking about heterosexual promiscuity here is a bad idea, even if we get rid of STDs. Let's put STDs aside. Let's imagine there are no STDs and there's no homosexuality. We're talking about heterosexual sexual promiscuity is a bad idea for the female because it's a bad idea for the female because of how men and women's psychology. I mean, it basically goes like this. Men are primarily interested in sex.
Well, that's true, but that doesn't help your argument.
Yeah, well, I'm using it as a premise. Men are primarily interested in sex. That doesn't mean they can't be interested in anything else, but if you see an attractive woman, there's at least a second there where you're thinking about sex and you're not thinking about how smart she is or anything of the sort of thing that feminists would want you to value. Right. I mean, it's just natural that you look at a woman who is physically attractive. The first thing that is going to cross your mind is sex or something of a sexual nature. That's not even a choice. That's just physiologically going to happen. What you decide to do about that is a choice, I would argue. But that initial idea is not a choice. So there's this sort of caveman, primitive side to every man, or at least every healthy man. And so what men are primarily looking for in a relationship with a woman that is close in the way that sexual relationships typically are is sex. And this is not true for women. Women are interested in sex, but the thing that women are primarily interested in is this sort of emotional reinforcement and understanding. And that's actually a lot deeper and more complex and more sophisticated than how men work. Women are much more complicated, much more mysterious than men are, really. And so women are looking for this sort of emotional reinforcement, and on a naturalistic sort of level, they're looking for some way to support them and their children. I mean, just, you'd think naturally a woman would be looking for that. So what sexual promiscuity does, what casual sex does, is it gives the man everything he wants while requiring from him nothing. Or not requiring nearly enough from him. C.S. Lewis talks about this indirectly in the Chronicles of Narnia, where one of his talking animal characters says, "As we birds say, nests before eggs." I mean, even a bird is smart enough to know that you don't lay eggs until the male has built you a good nest. I mean, this is really, really obvious stuff. So, I mean, a lot of times when feminists will denigrate men or traditional gentleman type thinkers like myself for thinking women are stupid, you're sexist, you think all women are stupid. Well, I don't think all women are stupid, but I think some of them actually are. I mean, I find it hard to be overly concerned with this accusation of thinking women are stupid when I have manifest evidence that that some of them actually are, because they're taking this really stupid bargain of casual sex and sexual promiscuity and so on, which gives men everything they want and requires from them nothing. And it's just always going to be a bad deal for the woman. And this is without even bringing God into it. It's just a bad deal for women.
Let's bring it home to the 24th century, shall we? You've got, in this episode, Let He Who Is Without Sin, Julian Bashir, who is not known as a man of monogamy. And you've got Lita, who, she's a Dabo girl, so let's just say that and get it over with.
Yeah.
And they go their separate ways, but Worf doesn't know this. So they're pursuing sexual relationships independently of each other, and the judgment is made that they're doing something horribly wrong because they ought to be intertwined with each other. But the judgment was made...
Who made that judgment?
Worf. He said they have disgraced themselves.
Oh, right, yeah. And I understand where Worf's coming from on that.
Well, sure. But given that they said that, I want to argue that they didn't necessarily do anything wrong. I don't know what you want to take first, the theological or the natural ethic.
I'm not exactly going to help you out with that if you aren't going to give me which direction to go first. What goes around comes around. You've got to decide which one to do first yourself now.
Well, let's go there, Home Slice. You've got so many heroes of the faith who are thought of in noble terms, but by Victorian-era sexual ethics standards are not virtuous people, such as Solomon. You have a view of sexuality that you can cherry pick go through scriptures and say, okay, well, this agrees with me, this doesn't agree with me, and so I'm going to ignore it. And you can say, okay, well, here's Paul exhorting deacons to be monogamous, and here's a failure of that practice, even though it's exalted. And I'm just going to push that aside, or I'm going to say it's sinful for reasons X, Y, and Z. Or here you have God commanding something polyamorous with Jacob, or what have you, and it's just brushed aside. Well, I don't think it should be. I think it should be recognized that there's a multiplicity of views, and I really am going somewhere with this. But the second thing I wanted to talk about was the pragmatism of it all. Well, it really doesn't matter to me that a guy has to prove himself as this, dare say, bland breadwinner before he engages in sexual relations with someone. To me, that's not necessary. To you, it is for him to engage in sex, but to me, I really don't see that. I mean, it's ethical to do that after the fact if there's a child produced. It's I think we would have like-minded ethics on that point. But I don't think it's necessary to do that prior. I don't think it's necessary to be this 1950s breadwinner beforehand.
Okay.
And I don't see the imposition. I don't see the ethical imposition to do it beforehand. That's what I'm asking. I don't see why it's necessary for somebody to have built a house, to have built a bedroom, to have built a crib before he has sex with a woman. I don't see why that's necessary. I don't see why he can't just have sex, and then if something happens, he can do that after the fact.
Okay, well,
let's talk about whether or not Julian and Lita were doing anything immoral when they were pursuing sexual relationships outside of the relationship.
All right, I'll go there.
Is that Bajoran ethical custom ethics, or is it the lack of ethics?
Okay, well, I'll get there. I might respond to your points and then bring Lita and Ram back into it. That's who we're talking about, right? I got the names right. I remember the faces. I'm not so good at the names.
Well, it was Julian. It was Julian
Lita and Julian, and then she leaves Julian for Ram.
That's right. At the end of the episode, she confessed for Ram.
All right. There we go. Well, I was going to say, in regard to the Christian ethic, I never did say Victorian. Okay, no, I might. Yeah, you brought that up. I didn't say anything about Victorian. I'm not talking about anything that is peculiar to the Victorian era. The Victorians might have gone rather overboard in their zeal in the promotion of chastity. I mean, they might have gone to an extreme. I think our society is going to an extreme in the opposite direction. I mean, both extremes, I would say, are bad. But what I am talking about is an ethic that goes all the way back to the Ten Commandments. You know, thou shalt not commit adultery. I mean, it's one of the basics of morality, right in the Ten Commandments. That is not a peculiarity of the Mosaic law. I mean, it's even if you read the Talmud, it's even, I haven't, but if you do, it's even in the 7 laws of Noah. You know, in Judaism, you had the Mosaic law, which was really just for the Jews, but you also had the 7 laws of Noah, which was for everyone, even including the right, you know, someone who wants to be a righteous Gentile, because there were righteous Gentiles. I mean, the Jews were not everyone except us is going to hell. That's American Protestants mostly who have said that. the Jews were, God's chosen people are held to a higher standard than the rest of the world, but the rest of the world has to abide by the 7 laws of Noah, and one of those laws was a prohibition on sexual immorality. I mean,
but you assume
I am
sexual
talking about.
immorality, and then
I'm
say
talking
there's a
about.
prohibition against it.
I'm talking about a very ancient standard, and one which goes clear back to Moses at least.
None of the patriarchs held that.
I think that they largely did. They didn't necessarily obey it, but I think, at least in theory, they held that this was true, that there was a prohibition against sexual immorality. Some of them thought that polygamy was acceptable, but not promiscuity.
Okay. Well, no.
They were tempted into it, but they didn't promote it as a good, which is what is going on nowadays.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk about polyamory within a Star Trek context. So, Julie, like.
Well, hold on. I need to cover this. I need to mention that as a Latter-day Saint, the Book of Mormon talks about this issue, and what it says is that polygamy was wrong even when David and Solomon did it. David and Solomon were wrong to do it. And how it could ever make sense for Brigham Young to introduce polygamy into the Latter-day Saint movement, it just makes no sense alongside what the Book of Mormon says about polygamy, which is don't do it.
Okay, well you've covered your RLDS bases.
Yeah. I just thought I needed to put that in.
Out
so
there.
Thanks very much.
You're not going to the hell or third level of heaven or whatever RLDS believes.
Sorry, I just needed.
We're over that. We're over that.
Before we leave this topic, I also need to respond to your arguments against my naturalistic ethic. So,
no, well, that's exactly what I wanted to move us to. I mean, I don't know that we've adequately covered the theological, but it's as Chris would say, he would start flashing the red alert button if we pursued that any further.
He probably would need to.
Can you adequately say that Julian, Bashir, and Lita had done something immoral simply because they pursued other people? From a naturalistic standpoint. Well,
here's the thing. I think that Star Trek in general assumes that the 24th century takes a kind of perspective on sexuality that the producers of the show see as an ideal, but which makes the idea of commitment in relationships largely meaningless. Other than the feeling of jealousy that's created when somebody else gets interested in somebody else, they try to portray as if there is no harm in sleeping around or open marriage or whatever. Or, I mean, there's no point in getting married at all, as far as I can tell.
There is.
In the Star Trek universe, I mean, what's the point of getting married?
Stability.
Well, it seems to me that they have all this artificial technology and so forth, which they would, their futuristic social structure and so on, which would seem, at least as far on the surface, as far as I can tell, the producers of the show seem to think that stability is not even an issue to be considered. I mean, I don't see as how they even make stability an issue.
Well, it is. I mean, it's an issue for O'Brien.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I guess O'Brien was a pretty good.
I know, but even he would look around and be desirous of others. But the thing is, you can have a desire for stability, and at the same time, you could have this Risian ethic. I mean, I don't see where the contradiction is in natural law ethics. I don't see that Bashir had done anything wrong. I don't see how you could condemn a whole slew of behaviors on Risa on the basis of natural law, because the only thing that you've given me is that it's somehow anti-feminist when
well,
women don't necessarily have that desire. Women don't necessarily desire the nuclear family picture of things, and so I don't see that there's been any sort of violation.
Well, what I'm saying
of that
there
if
is
you're
that
upfront. If you're upfront and say, well, let me finish my thought. My thought was your point against Bashir and Lita, or Risean behavior in general, Risean slut behavior, was that it's anti-feminist. Well, wherein lies the anti-feminism if you're upfront and say, look, this is who I am, this is what I do, and you can participate or not. I don't see how that's anti-feminist if women know full well what they're getting into.
Okay, my point was not that it's anti-feminist, or even that it's anti-female. Really,
I misunderstood you, and I apologize for that. I did misunderstand you, though.
But that it is from the woman's point of view. If she had a lick of sense and wasn't as dumb as a box of rocks, the nuclear family works out entirely to her advantage in the long run, while sexual promiscuity works out entirely to her disadvantage in the long run.
So basically, you don't like men.
I am a man. I like men. I don't like overgrown boys.
Well, I guess we better leave, Kirby.
Well, what I mean by overgrown boys is not geekery, where you still like the same things you like when you're a kid. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I mean by overgrown boys is somebody who has the physiological capability to get a girl pregnant, but doesn't have the guts to take responsibility for that and raise the baby. No. Marry the girl, do whatever he needs to do to make sure that, is taken care of.
But
we end up with all these single mothers around who are just in total poverty and just completely destitute, who we end up having to help because there are just so many playboys around instead of men. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is a big problem. In our real society. Maybe it wouldn't be in a Star Trek society where everything's so super perfect, but in real life, that is a serious, serious problem.
I like super perfect, but Ben, my point is that you're milking the premise for more than it's worth.
Okay, how am I doing that?
Well, because you're saying, here's an issue. Irresponsibility. You've created a life. You don't feel as if you're responsible for it. But the problem was the fact that you had a chubby on Risa. Whereas and I exaggerate there, but my point is that what you've got is a fact. Men are irresponsible. And a solution, which is a very strict, I don't want to say strict isn't the right word, but a very dogmatic view of what constitutes sexual morality. And if something falls outside of that, all of a sudden you're promoting this view of sexuality, which means if you create a child, well, you can run away and that's okay. Well, I don't think that that's true either. I think that there's a middle ground between sex being this one thing, which is the nuclear family. You've created the nest. Now you can start laying some eggs. And you've got this other view, which is you can lay some eggs and just start throwing them at houses on Halloween. There's a middle ground whereby you can be responsible and sexual at the same time. You don't have to wait. You could be Julian, Bashir, and Lita. You can be Worf and Dax, whereby you recognize the desire that each other has, and you can act on that. You can see to it that that sort of thing flourishes, but you don't necessarily have to negate it. And I'm just concerned that there is an element of Victorian era Protestantism in your views that negates it. Refute me if you must.
Okay, first of all, I might say I deny the charge that I'm against sex.
I didn't say you were against sex.
Well, I think that ethics many times will demand that a man control his sexual impulses, at certain times. But also ethics will demand that a man encourage them at other times.
Sure.
I mean,
No doubt.
you, in the context of family building, I think that men are under an obligation, to encourage their sexual impulses and so on. And you would be a bad husband if you didn't, even make a conscious effort in that direction. So it's not that, we shouldn't be sexual. It's that we should get married. And that getting married ought to mean something. If you have sex outside of marriage, you have disassociated from marriage what was intended, I think, to provide the fundamental basis for marriage. And so what you've done, you've sabotaged your marriage largely, I think.
Well, you've assumed Chris is about to interrupt us.
Sure.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Okay.
But I don't know how we can bring this to a close. I mean, we won't. So
right. I was going to bring it back to.
But I wanted to say
cheer.
That
you were asking me to do that, and I needed to do that. Is bring it back to.
Well, what happened was we touched upon a subject that you're butting heads against here, and you want to be able to talk it out, and that's great, but we just don't have the time for that.
Sure,
it's a wonderful topic to be able to explore further, but we just don't have time in Trekosophy to do that.
Sure, but I could bring it back to Star Trek to get us to a close here.
One moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to say one little thing here, and maybe this will also just add to the fire, more fuel for it. But I just wanted to say that all three of us here right now are Christian. We look at sexuality from a Christian point of view largely. And that's one of the main arguments Ben is bringing up about marriage and the sanctity of it. Whereas we have to remember Roddenberry was largely atheist, I believe, or at least agnostic. I can't remember which. The writers probably followed along in those footsteps. So much of what we see on screen is mostly atheistic or at least agnostic. So they don't really subscribe to the sanctity of marriage.
Well,
yeah,
that's true. That's
and
true.
I was heading in that direction by pointing out that in the context of Star Trek, it is almost impossible to have or maintain the kind of ethic that I am advocating, because at least, you can in your isolated pocket. What's his name? O'Brien, is the one character who gives it the best shot. But largely, to get married in Star Trek on Star Trek means almost nothing. Does it mean you're going to move in together? Why can't you move in together without it?
Well, exactly. That's what the atheistic view of marriage is.
Yeah, and it becomes nothing but a legal contract. And
exactly,
the romantic elements that are associated with it are drained of all their meaning. And when they're when they're taken out of their context, drained of all their meaning, the thing that used to make it romantic is gone. And by the 24th century, I would argue the romance would be entirely gone.
It's not gone.
Well, that's because we aren't looking at the 24th century. We're looking at people in the 20th century making a TV show.
My point is, the thing is that would make marriage, wonderful sexuality is not in the 24th century because people still have sex then. So it's not gone. It's still there.
Okay, so is it still there in Huxley's Brave New World?
No.
Why not?
Well, a slew of reasons. Well, I mean, the fact is, you got in that book 4-year-olds who have no barriers towards their sexuality.
Like on Beta Z.
Well, I didn't see that in any script.
You don't, do you? But they talk about it. They just can't show it on TV.
Well, I didn't see the discussion there either.
He's talking about how in marriage, when everyone takes off their clothes or something, isn't it? Or just
well, I suppose that's true, and they did show that on TV. That you have Alexander seeing Roxana completely naked.
Yeah.
But I get your point on that. That there is a legitimate ethical discussion as to whether or not that's good or that's bad. And you know what? I would actually think there's a legitimate ethical and moral debate on that subject. And I'm not going to defend the licentious view on that, because I don't hold it.
Yeah, but we're out of time. But if we were going to carry this forward, I'd want to know why not and what's the difference.
Yeah, I know. Oh, wow, that would be great.
We need to make this into a 2-parter for sure, I think.
All right, well, yeah, we have run out of time. Once again, this is definitely a topic we'll have to come back to. But for now, we just have to say thanks for listening to us. You can find us on Trekosophy.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, send us an email at trekosophy@gmail.com, and please leave us a review on iTunes if you get a chance. If you have any questions for us or any topics you'd like to suggest, send them to us. Join us next week. So for Ben McLean and Brandon Kirby, this is Chris McGee saying thanks for listening. See you next time.
And even if we don't agree on sexual morality issues, I think we should all agree that you should never rape kittens.
I'm not sure if there's a whole episode in that topic, though.
Well,
or if there is, it would be a Ben talks for 90% of the episode.
No, that's the Jadzia Jackson bathing suit episode. Yeah, Let He Was Without Sin, Jadzia Jackson bathing suit.
Well, they're saying that I guess the story was just bad or something, or maybe there's too many inconsistencies.
There were too many consistencies, if anything.
All I'm saying is that it's rated extraordinarily low. It's like one of the worst DS9 episodes next to Move Along Home.
It's actually one of my favorites. And Move Along Home would be...
I like to Move Along Home.
Take us to Quarks. I love that episode. Not as much as I love Let He Was Without Sin, but I did love the episode.
Canada is this little teeny hat that America wears.
I saw him.
You saw him?
I know, I saw the face of Ben.
I mean, it's near the end of the summer. A lot of people are on vacation right around now, so it just seems like a good time to do it.
Well, they won't get posted for like 6 weeks from now.
Oh, well.
Well, maybe 4.
That's true.
I just narrowly avoided saying something critical like I wish you could get them out sooner, but I really shouldn't say that because you're just doing a lot of work that keeps this podcast afloat, and we really appreciate that. Don't know, is this a real person or a fictional person or what?
Well, she's real. She's part of the Star Trek universe. It's one of my favorites.
You just like seeing the scantily clad Lita.
Yes, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the Jadzia. I enjoyed it all.
And there's an alternate scene image of Lita wearing even less there.
Oh, good. I can't wait to click on this.
So don't put any of this in the outtakes, because if you do, I'll kill you.
You know, I'll go on the record and say the greatest 2 episodes of Star Trek of all time had to be Voyager, Warp 10, and an original series, Spock's Brain. Those were the greatest 2.
He's just a terrible logician, always gets that wrong in most of the Holmesian incarnations, and has spread more misinformation on the subject of logic than I think almost any other fictional character, with the possible exception of Mr. Spock.
Why don't we talk about Rysian sluts like Jadzia Dax?
Talk about marriage in the 21st century, moral hypocrisy, and the other 4 fingers.
Rosie Palm and her 5 sisters.